Amy Walker thought she was just doing the right thing. A man, exhausted and starving, walked into the diner with only $5 to his name. She saw the desperation in his eyes and made a choice to give him a hot meal, no questions asked. But when her ruthless manager found out, he threw the food in the trash and humiliated them both, and then, in front of the entire diner, he fired her on the spot. She thought that was the end of it. She had lost her job, her income, and had no idea what to do next. But less than 24 hours later, the military showed up. A convoy of Marines stormed into the very same diner and at the front of the line. The man she had fed the night before, now standing tall in his full military uniform. What happened next is unlike anything you've ever heard before. Stay with me, because this is one story you need to hear. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an unbelievable story like this again. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. It was a slow night at the diner, the kind of place that never made the news, where people came and went unnoticed by the world. But that night, something happened that no one could have predicted. Amy Walker, a young waitress working the late shift, had just finished serving the last few customers when she noticed him. A man, tired, worn, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He hesitated at the entrance, as if debating whether he even belonged there. When he finally stepped. Inside, every movement spoke of exhaustion. He counted the crumpled bills in his hand and approached the counter. "What's the cheapest thing on the menu?" His voice was rough, yet polite. Amy glanced at the register. $5. That wouldn't get him much. Something about him struck a chord deep within her. Maybe it was the quiet desperation in his eyes, or the way his hands trembled ever so slightly. Maybe it was just gut instinct. Either way, she made a decision in that moment. "Don't worry about it," she said with a warm smile. She served him a full meal, hot, fresh, and exactly what he needed. He looked up, surprised. "I can't afford this." Amy shook her head. "It's on me." His gratitude was overwhelming, but little did she know this small act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change everything. She barely had a chance to walk back behind the counter when she heard the heavy footsteps approaching. Rick, the restaurant's manager, had seen everything, and he wasn't happy. "Are you out of your mind, Amy? We're running a business, not a charity." His voice carried through the quiet diner, making heads turn. Amy tried to explain, tried to reason with him, but Rick wasn't having it. He stormed over to the man's table, grabbed the plate, and, with a look of absolute disdain, tossed the food straight into the trash. The man said nothing. He only sat there, his hands clenched into fists, staring at the now empty space before him. Amy felt her blood boil. "Are you serious? He was hungry," she snapped, stepping forward. Rick turned on her with a look of pure contempt. "If you care so much, maybe you should be the one leaving." The words hit like a slap. The diner fell silent. Every customer, every staff member held their breath. "You're fired!" he spat, crossing his arms. Amy stood there, stunned. Fired for showing kindness. Fired for doing the right thing. She wanted to scream, to argue, to make him see reason. But what was the point? The damage was done. As she walked toward the exit, she glanced back one last time. The man she'd tried to help sat motionless, his face unreadable. Something about that moment felt unfinished. Amy barely slept that night. The weight of what had happened pressed against her chest like a boulder. Fired, just like that. And for what? For trying to do the right thing. The more she replayed the scene in her head, the more the injustice of it gnawed at her. What was she going to do now? She had bills to pay, rent coming up, and barely enough savings to last a week. But the thing that bothered her the most was the look on that man's face, the quiet, unspoken pain in his eyes. Morning came too soon, and with it the harsh reality of unemployment. She forced herself out of bed, threw on some clothes, and stepped outside with a plan: find another job. She'd start with the nearby diners, maybe a coffee shop, anything that would help her get back on her feet. But as she walked down the familiar street, something strange happened. Before she even realized where her feet were taking her, she found herself standing in front of that diner, the very place she had been thrown out of just hours ago. Why was she here? Some part of her wanted closure. Maybe to see if that man was okay. Maybe to, what? Give Rick a piece of her mind. As she stood there, caught in her own thoughts, something unexpected broke through the morning stillness. Engines. Multiple. The deep, unmistakable growl of military vehicles filled the street. She turned just in time to see an entire convoy of military trucks and SUVs pulling up in front of the diner. The doors swung open and out stepped a group of U.S. Marines. Tall, disciplined, unmistakable. And leading them was someone she recognized immediately, the very same man she had fed the night before. But now, he was different. Gone were the worn-out clothes and weary expression. He stood tall, his posture exuding strength, clad in an impeccable military uniform adorned with medals. Amy's heart pounded. What was happening? Was this some kind of coincidence? Before she could even process it, the door to the lead SUV opened again, and another man stepped out. Older, commanding, his presence alone demanded respect. A colonel. And judging by the look on his face, he wasn't here for a casual breakfast. Then, in one swift movement, they all marched straight toward the diner's entrance. Something big was about to go down. Inside the diner, the usual morning routine came to a screeching halt. Conversations died. Coffee cups paused mid-air. All eyes turned toward the entrance as the Marines stepped in, their boots echoing against the tile floor. Rick, the manager, looked up from behind the counter, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion. He clearly wasn't expecting a full military unit to march into his establishment. But the confusion quickly turned to unease when the colonel locked eyes with him and stepped forward. "Who's in charge here?" The colonel's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Rick hesitated for half a second before straightening up. That would be me. Can I help you?" His usual arrogance faltered, but he still forced out a smug smile, as if trying to maintain control of the situation. The man standing beside the colonel took a step forward, the same man Amy had helped the night before. But now, he wasn't just another struggling man down on his luck. He was Frank Mitchell, a highly decorated war veteran. A soldier who had risked his life for his country. And last night, Rick had thrown his meal in the trash like he was nothing. The colonel's eyes burned into Rick. "You threw a war hero's food in the garbage?" Rick blinked. "Wait, what?" He let out a forced laugh, as if this was some kind of joke. "You're saying this guy's a—" "Sergeant Frank Mitchell," the colonel interrupted, "a Marine Corps veteran, Silver Star recipient, served 3 tours overseas, saved an entire unit under enemy fire." His voice hardened. "And last night he walked into this diner hungry, exhausted, and you humiliated him." A ripple of shock spread through the room. Customers exchanged glances, whispers spreading like wildfire. A war hero? The very man Rick had treated like garbage. Rick's mouth opened, then closed, his bravado quickly unraveling. I didn't know," he stammered. His eyes darted around the room, but there was nowhere to hide. The weight of his actions was suddenly very real. Frank finally spoke, his voice steady. "You didn't ask." He took another step forward, his uniform immaculate, his medals glinting under the fluorescent lights. "You just assumed, like so many others." The diner fell into dead silence. Then the colonel turned, scanning the room. "Where's Amy Walker?" Amy, who had been frozen near the door, felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. Slowly, she stepped forward. "I'm here." Frank's expression softened. "You didn't know who I was either," he said, "but you treated me with dignity anyway." And then, the moment that no one expected, the colonel smiled. "Amy, how would you like to work for the U.S. military?" Amy stood frozen, her mind racing. Work for the military. That wasn't something she had ever imagined. She had spent years balancing bills, scraping by with waitressing jobs, never considering anything beyond just making it to the next paycheck. But now, standing in front of a decorated colonel and a war hero who had personally sought her out, she found herself speechless. She swallowed hard. I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that." The colonel exchanged a knowing glance with Frank before stepping closer. "Amy, let me tell you something about qualifications," he said. "We can train people in skills. We can teach protocols, strategies, even advanced military tactics. But what we can't teach is character. And that's exactly what you have." Frank nodded. "Last night you did something that most people wouldn't. You helped. Someone without expecting anything in return. You didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. That's the kind of person we need." Amy still wasn't convinced. "But what would I even be doing?" The colonel gestured toward the door. "Come with us. Let's talk outside." Hesitant but intrigued, Amy followed them out. The moment she stepped onto the sidewalk, she was met with a sight that left her breathless. A convoy of military vehicles stretched down the street, and beside them, men and women in uniform stood at attention. Frank turned to her. "There's a program, a support initiative for veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. Many of them face challenges finding jobs, securing housing, even getting a hot meal. We need people who care, who are willing to help them get back on their feet. People like you." Amy's heart pounded. This wasn't just another job. This was something bigger, something that actually mattered. The colonel extended his hand. "So, what do you say?" For the first time since losing her job, Amy felt something different. Purpose, possibility, a chance to make a real difference. She looked at Frank, then at the uniformed men and women waiting nearby, and slowly she reached out and shook the colonel's hand. She was in. Amy's first day at the Veterans Transition Center felt like stepping into an entirely different world. The building was a hub of activity, former soldiers coming and going, some deep in conversation, others focused on paperwork or training programs. The air was thick with determination, resilience, and something else, a quiet kind of struggle that not everyone could see. She had been given a simple but powerful role, to assist veterans in navigating the overwhelming bureaucracy of civilian life. Some needed help with resumes, others with securing housing or medical care. Many just needed someone to listen, someone who wouldn't judge. And that's where Amy excelled. At first, she wasn't sure if she truly belonged. She wasn't a soldier. She hadn't seen war, hadn't faced the horrors these men and women had endured. But the more she listened, the more she realized compassion was its own kind of strength. Frank, now a key part of the program, worked closely with her. He had a natural ability to connect with the veterans, bridging the gap between their military past and their uncertain future. "You'd be surprised how many of us feel invisible once we're out," he told her one afternoon. "Like the world just moved on without us." Amy understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. Together, they built something stronger than just a support center. They created a community. Amy pushed for new initiatives, partnerships with local businesses, mental health resources, even temporary housing solutions. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was making a difference. 6 months later, the Veterans Transition Center had transformed into something even bigger than Amy could have imagined. What once was just an office with a handful of struggling veterans had become a full-fledged support network, with businesses offering job placements, landlords opening doors to affordable housing, and mental health professionals volunteering their time. And at the heart of it all, Amy. To celebrate the program's success, she organized a large community event, a gathering designed to connect veterans with opportunities, resources, and most importantly, people who cared. The turnout was beyond what anyone expected. Employers showed up looking for hard-working candidates. Families arrived to show their support. Veterans, some who had once been on the brink of giving up, now stood tall, ready to take their next steps. But then Amy noticed something. At the far end of the hall, a man lingered near the entrance. He looked uncertain, as if torn between stepping inside or turning away. She recognized that look, the hesitation, the doubt, the feeling of not belonging. It was the same expression Frank had worn that night at the diner. Without a second thought, she walked over and offered a warm smile. "You don't have to do this alone," she said gently. The man hesitated, then nodded, and just like that, another life had taken its first step towards something better. As the event wrapped up, Frank approached her, but instead of words, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a crumpled receipt. Amy frowned, confused. "It's the bill from that night," Frank said. "The night you bought me that meal." His voice softened. "I kept it as a reminder that there's still good in the world." Amy stared at the worn-out piece of paper, her chest tightening. That one act of kindness had changed everything. Looking back, Amy never could have predicted how one simple act of kindness would completely transform her life. She had lost her job for doing the right thing, but in return, she had found purpose, community, and a mission far greater than she ever imagined. What if she had done nothing that night? What if she had looked the other way, like so many others had done before? Frank might have remained just another invisible face in the crowd, another veteran struggling alone. Instead, her small act of compassion had set off a chain reaction that not only changed his life, but countless others as well. This story proves something powerful. Doing the right thing isn't always easy. Sometimes it costs us, but in the end, it's worth it. Imagine if more people chose kindness over indifference. If more people took one small step to help someone in need, the world could be a very different place. Now here's the question. Do you believe in the power of kindness? If you do, type yes in the comments and share this story to inspire more people. Let's spread this message far and wide, because the world needs more people like Amy. Now I have to ask you, what would you have done in Amy's place? Would you have risked your job to help a stranger? Or would you have played it safe, not knowing what was at stake? This story proves one thing: kindness is powerful. Amy's small act of compassion didn't just change one life, it set off a chain reaction that transformed an entire community. It's a reminder that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. So now it's your turn. Do you believe in the power of kindness? Type yes in the comments and share this story to inspire more people. And if you love stories like this, hit that like button, subscribe and turn on notifications, because trust me, the next one, it's even more unbelievable. Click here to watch now.